67 days of semen retention. Relapses and discipline. This community has a consensus talking about relapses, that if you were to relapse, and they say eventually you will, they all say, and I believe this to be true, you can't beat yourself up over it. You just got to pick yourself up, start all over again. And from last year, starting on Thanksgiving, going all the way to February 12th, I would relapse and then wallow in it for 2 or 3 days. You know, I'd be retaining for 2-3 days, sometimes 4. I went as long as 6, and I would relapse and then fall right back into 2 or 3 days of kind of sitting in my mess. You know, and at some point, you know, during that time, I really didn't have any context as to what it meant to, you know, don't beat yourself up, and, you know, you got to get up and you got to start all over again. You know, if you're really serious about this, this is what you're going to do. And I really didn't have any context as to how to do that, you know. But I wanted to share another experience with you. Back when I was 21 years old, I had quit smoking cigarettes. Cold turkey, and I haven't had one since. It's been like 35 years, or it's been about a little over 30 years. And supposedly nicotine is one of the most addictive substances there are on the planet. You know, that is really hard to break that cycle. But at the time, you know, I kind of felt like I had a leg up on it because I had only smoked cigarettes for 5 years. I started smoking when I was 16, and I only smoked until I was 21, and that's when I quit. So I thought, well, maybe I had it easier than most people who smoke for 10, 20, 30 years, and they just can't seem to kick the habit. During that time, I helped facilitate a what they call a freedom from smoking class at the local hospital in Cookville, and there were a lot of people some people that came and went, but for the majority, we have a lot of people that would show up, you know, every week for about 2 or 3 weeks, and then evidently they decided that they couldn't handle it and they couldn't quit, and they didn't come back. But that's just an example right there of, at a time in my life, I thought there were no excuses. You know, that no matter, I had a little mantra that no matter what happens today, I go day by day. No matter what happens today, I'm not going to smoke. No ands, ifs, or buts about it. No excuses. Because if I figured, if I smoked one cigarette, then I might as well go out and buy a carton of them. And this may date me a little bit. But when I quit smoking cigarettes, I was smoking Camels, about a pack a day, pack and a half. They were $1.35 a pack, and now you can't touch those for like $8 or $9 a pack. So it's just to show you what time and inflation does. But I had to take it seriously. You know, I had to think about, you know, my health, my future health. You know, what I wanted out of my future. Did I want to be this old man hooked up to an oxygen tank with lung cancer or emphysema and struggling to breathe? No, I didn't want that. You know, I had to have a goal and a vision in mind. And as long as I smoked, and into my adult years, and the older I got, the worse it would get. And I think this is the same that goes for semen retention. And I'm living proof. And I believe that The longer you do it, the harder it is to quit. Maybe not the harder it is to quit, but the heavier of a toll it will take on your mind, body, and spirit the longer you do it. And I'm living proof of that. So, I want to ask you a question. How much do you want this? What is your why? There was a motivational speaker I listened to back in the day, the late Jim Rohn, and what he always asked, what is your why? Why do you want to do what you want to do? What is your future? What goals do you want to set? How do you see yourself in 5, 10, 15, 20 years? What do you want to get to? So, with that said, I think it comes down, as far as semen retention goes, I think about a future. I think about all the benefits, and you can watch dozens and dozens of videos on semen retention, and a lot of content creators, including myself, will, over our experience, we will talk about the benefits this has. We will talk about, little by little, what's happening in our lives, and what is happening in our minds, bodies, and spirit, and the benefits that we're reaping from this. And, in that case, I think it's the same thing as when I quit smoking cigarettes. You have to take it one day at a time and have that same mantra. No matter what happens today, I will not fap. No matter what happens today, I'm not going to, lay in my bed and watch porn and jerk off all the time. I can't do that. I have to get used to saying porn, because evidently the other word is not really acceptable on YouTube. I'll get to it. But, and then I have to, not only do I have to look at my future, you have to look at your future and the kind of man you want to be. Where do you want to see yourself in 5, 10, 15 years? Living a life of honor and chaste. Where do you want to be? You want to advance your career. You want to be a healthier person. You want to be able to withstand life's challenges and weather any storm that comes your way. I think that's awareness. And I think what it all boils down to, and I want to use this key word here, awareness. You have to be aware of what you want and the goals you want to set for your life. And especially, you have to be aware, and this is what I have now more than where I see myself in the future, but I also have this awareness of where I was. And I think in my first video, I kind of gave a brief little synopsis of, what I was dealing with as I got into middle age, and being addicted to PMO, and being addicted to, hookups and promiscuous sex with women I hardly knew. But I want to go down this little list that I made here of just some of the things that I dealt with, when it came to, in regard to my health and where I was mentally and physically and spiritually. See, also that same year when I quit smoking cigarettes, I had come to know my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and I accepted him into my life to be my Lord and Savior, and went through the baptism. This is Southern Appalachia, so I went to a Baptist church. But as I got into my 20s, even though I prayed that prayer of salvation, in my mind I was not completely ready, and I still reveled in the party scene. I went to raves up in the Midwest and around here, and back then they were highly illegal. They didn't have any security. You went into these dark, dank warehouses where the promoter set up and the DJ set up their sound and equipment and their lighting equipment, and it was a 50-50 shot whether or not it got busted. Those who are my age might know of these things. But anyway, going into my late 30s is, well, really when I could say my early 20s. In my early 20s, after I moved down here and I quit smoking cigarettes and, gave my heart to my Lord and Savior, after that I met a woman, and she was just graduating out of local college here at Tennessee Tech. And that's one place where I became distracted. I became distracted as to what I wanted to do with my future. I became, I had forgotten what my purpose was as a Christian man. And boy, the sex was amazing. Sex was amazing, and I was with her for a period of about a year. And as I started to drain my seed more and more with this woman, she lost her respect for me. Where she was, graduated with a degree in civil engineering and was going on to these bigger and better things. I was still a factory worker, and the more I lost my seed, I was just beginning to soften, becoming more effeminate, and just be a worthless dud, for lack of a better word. And that kind of started a snowball effect for me going in, into my late 20s. And then I finally, found the Lord again, and I was into drugs, and to me, I only thought that drugs was my main issue. I smoked a lot of weed. I was still going to these raves and doing ecstasy and doing all these other designer drugs. And of course, with porn and masturbation and promiscuous sex, it was only driving me down into the spiral. And but I got married. I actually went to a faith-based rehab on campus for 1 year. And I thought, well, I'm gonna stop doing drugs. I gotta stop living my life like this, And at the problem, I thought it was only drugs. I didn't think about it being PMO. I didn't think about my problem being, my addiction to sex and all things, in regard to sex. But after I got out of that rehab, I met a woman, and another one, and she was raised in the church, and she was, raised to be a woman of virtue. And I thought, well, see, that right there, that's what I need. And hey, we get married, we can have all the sex we want, and it ain't no big deal. But over time, going into, and this is whom I had my first and only child with, we had, in the beginning of the honeymoon phase, we had a lot of sex, and it was like almost every day. But over time, that began to taper off. But I was insatiable, and that wasn't enough for me. So, right about that time, in the early 2000s, internet porn had become a thing. And if a few days or a week, 2 weeks had gone by where I wasn't having any kind of physical intimacy with my wife, I would sneak off with my laptop and, later on, of course, a smartphone, go into the bathroom, and I found porn, and that's where my really hardcore, I discovered my dad's stack of magazines back when I was 8 years old, but it was right around 2008 or 9, and I was still married at the time. I had actually found internet, porn. And that's where problems really began to start, because of how easily accessible it was. I was insatiable in my marriage. I wanted more. She couldn't keep up. She didn't want to keep up. She was losing respect for me. And it wasn't a good scene. And, eventually it all came to a head. All this piled up, and we ended up getting a divorce. So after that, going into my late 30s, the one right after my divorce to my first wife, I'd met a woman, and it was online, and at first it was supposed to be just kind of a friends with benefits kind of thing. Every once in a while on the weekends we would get together and just have these week-long marathons, whatever. And then about 6 months later, we decided, hey, yeah, let's move in together. I think that would be, good for us, and we could take our relationship a lot further. And she kept my balls absolutely drained. The funny thing about her is she had dealt with a lot of childhood wounds too. She had come from an abusive family, and she had been sexually assaulted when she was younger. So that really dulled her emotions. She was an emotional dud. She didn't like to talk about her feelings. Everything was just kept superficial. We went out and we did things, we had fun together, but if I tried to engage in some kind of deep conversation with her, she would immediately withdraw. She wouldn't get angry with me. At the end of the night, she still wanted to have sex with me, and that was an everyday occurrence. The sex was amazing. And that was when I discovered that I had some wild kinks, and there was a lot of things that we loved to do together. And she had discovered some things, about her that she didn't even know in the bedroom. And things got kind of fluidy, I guess you can say. But it was, over time, I think that lasted about a year and 3 months or whatever. Over time, I had actually began to get frustrated with the idea that she just wanted no kind of emotional intimacy or spiritual intimacy with me at all. She was just kind of locked in her own world, and the only way, like myself, at the same time, I wanted emotional intimacy, but the physical intimacy was more important to me. And the only thing that was really important to her, the only way she knew how to show love, was through sexual intimacy. But that ran its course after a while. She never did lose respect for me because, well, she wanted to have sex. And here's the crazy thing. We never had arguments about anything. We never fought about anything. As long as I went to work, and as long as I did the things around the house, and as long as, things were on the surface cool, she had no problems with me whatsoever. She never picked a fight about anything. The only fight that she picked with me, and it wasn't really intentional on her part to start with, was she already had a child. She had a toddler, but she wanted one more. And after having my own son, I thought that was it. I was an only child. My son was an only child for me, and that's all I wanted. And I had planned, at some point on getting a vasectomy. And I eventually did. But I think that right there is what kind of led to our end. Her attitude toward me kind of changed a little bit, it was actually a year into it before, we had that conversation. And after that, things changed. She didn't want anything, after a while, the spark had died, and actually the sex had kind of waned. Not in frequency, but the intensity of it waned, because she knew that I just wasn't interested in having any more children. And then after her, I had a little short, little rendezvous about 2 months with another woman down in Chattanooga. And again, the sex was wild and crazy, and on the daily or whenever we got to see each other, it was then that I really discovered my love for women with lots of curves and tattoos and nerdy glasses. But yeah, that was a weakness for me, and she was fantastic in the bedroom too. And then after her, I met my second wife. And it kind of, she was I had a lot more, I think I had a lot more in common with her than my first. And we had sex on the daily, but it quickly waned off, and the intensity wasn't what I was used to experiencing. And she lost respect for me because it was right about that time I was getting into my late 30s, and that's when me blowing my load all the time, whether I was having sex with her or sneaking into the bathroom. There's people here. I didn't think there would be. That we would be... I lost my train of thought now. This happens. But, oh yeah, over time, she would lose respect for me too. Just like my first wife did. And she didn't want it. She didn't want me anymore. And that's because, my drive for life, my ambitions, my dreams were just not there. By the time I got into my late 30s, it was all I can do to get up and go to work. And come home, and then I just wanted to plop down on the couch and watch TV. And I was the emotional dud at that point. It really started to catch up with me, but I kind of want to go over a lot of the mental, physical, and spiritual consequences that I had to deal with, in my late 30s and going into my 40s. Of course, this goes back to the childhood wounds. This goes back to the childhood wounds and goes back, to the abuse and the house I grew up in, and my father being an abusive alcoholic and all that. That all started to catch up to me too, along with my failing health. Start with low energy vibration. Of course, I just didn't have any drive. I didn't have any ambition to do anything crazy. I didn't have any goals. Restlessness. While I was running on low energy and low vibration, my brain didn't stop. We're talking some serious turbo ADD. I was irritable all the time. The slightest little, and I had a short temper, the slightest little thing would set me off. I never acted out violently, but I would always lash out verbally. And my last ex-wife was she had to bear the brunt of that. Cool, I think they're gone. But worry and stress and anxiety, that's a big one. That's a real big one, because coming down to that, I had financial worries because, I was in a dead-end job that I had been at for 10 years, and I didn't think it was going anywhere. I was tired, the job was hard. During the summertime, the facility was really hot, upwards to 110 degrees. I was just tired all the time, every day tired, wore out. And, as time wore on, when inflation goes up and your income stays the same, financial worries come into the picture. And, some of the things that caused was an uneasy stomach. I was dealing with indigestion issues. I had been laid up in the hospital with bleeding ulcers, and it was not exactly ideal for my mental health at all. What else? I was physically weak. And it was hard for me to operate during the day when I needed to operate the most. I had a magnesium deficiency. Still kind of have it though. I'm supplementing. starting to eat things that are rich in magnesium more. Now I'm aware. So, what else? You know, all the worry and the stress, of course, with what happens leads to high blood pressure. Never took a high blood pressure medication, but with the way I was eating in my diet and the worry and the stress, of course, what that, you know, that's going to lead to high blood pressure most every time. Brain fog, lack of motivation. I was lazy, complacent. And as I got into my late 40s and up to just last year, there's this term that a lot of younger kids use these days, and a lot of them revel in it and think it's a quality: bed rotting. Where all I wanted to do was just lay around and do nothing. If I wasn't at work, I didn't have any interests outside of, you know, PMO. Bed rotting and PMO. That was all I did from my late 40s up until last November, for the most part. So, you know, I got addicted to social media. Facebook was my big thing. And I was always looking for kind of validation, some kind of validation, especially from women, you know, and putting up this front of something that I really wasn't, you know, so I can impress, you know, women that I've never met before. And I think they saw right through it. They didn't pay no mind to me, because it's like, it's in the ether. It was my vibration. Doesn't matter if it's face to face. You can be smartphone to smartphone and one Facebook account to the other, and women sense this. Women know. Promiscuous sex, of course. I would find a way, you know, and you know, other websites. One in particular where I got lucky and I found another friend with benefits, but that, after 6 months, quickly fizzled out too, as I was getting like 48, 49. But I just it got to the point where my life had no direction, no drive, no ambition, no real thing that I wanted to do that meant anything at all, that had any kind of significance to myself or others around me. But that awareness is what keeps me going. That awareness as to what I was as a person, as just as one guy says, a depleted fuck. I was just that, a depleted fuck. A loser. A lazy, complacent, effeminate loser. And that's where my awareness is now. I have a bigger awareness of what I was than where I want to go for my future. And with that said, that's going to help me build my future. That's going to help me set goals, long-term goals. How do I want to live my life? How do I want to eat? What's my diet? Am I going to have a workout regimen? I already do. I'm walking, I'm eating better. This trail to get down to here was pretty steep, and I got to walk right back up. But I have bigger plans now. I don't know exactly what it is, you know, and through, you know, prayer and meditation, I believe that as long as I'm doing this, as long as I'm living my life with self-respect and honor and chaste, then God's going to reward me, you know, and that seems to be a consensus too. But I wanted to touch on something too. You know, a lot of guys are going into semen retention and they're with someone. They want to, you know, go through retention, but they're married or they have a girlfriend. Well, what if I am married? What if I do have a girlfriend and she likes a lot of sex? If she doesn't understand and doesn't support you in your journey, then she's not the woman for you. Absolutely not. So my thought is if you wanted to get into a relationship with somebody, even if it's intermittent, they say, well, if you get married, then you're pure, then you can have all the sex you want. No, that's all well and good, but I'm already a walking, talking poster child example of how that worked out. Because eventually, if you're blowing your load all the time, a woman will lose respect for you. And she's going to be off and moving to the next one. She wants to be a woman. Most honorable, good, virtuous women, they want to be with a man who holds a safe space for her. Sex aside, she wants to feel secure. She wants to feel emotionally secure with her man. She wants to be able to share her thoughts and dreams. And honestly, and I'm also walking, talking proof of this, if you're blowing your load all the time, whether it's through sex or PMO, you really can't hold a space for her to allow her to be emotionally intimate with you. She wants emotional intimacy. A good woman will want spiritual intimacy. She wants to grow with you in those ways. And sex is just a perk. So I think if you find a virtuous woman who wants these things, wants the emotional security and the emotional intimacy more than anything, she will respect your journey in semen retention. And I'm not saying that you should just abstain from sex with her all the way around. It's you gotta pace yourself. And I think with that said, leading up to this, my next point I want to make here, and this is a consensus too, and I think the older you get, the longer it takes. I honestly believe that in semen retention, you have to go on a streak for 6 months to 12 months, maybe even more. And I think the older you are, the longer it's going to take. It's going to take minimum 6 months, 8 months, 12 months for your body and your mind and your spirit to get to a point where you're at optimum health. You are at optimal health. You're working out. You're financially better off. You've done a 360. I'm sorry, a 180. If you do a 360, you're right back to square one. But if you do a 180, you find yourself at a place where after your body and your mind has regenerated, your nervous system has gone through a period of repair and regeneration, and all the other attributes of your health and your well-being are on par, then I think intermittent retention may be okay for you. Once a month or once every 3 months, 4 months. Again, I don't want to sit here and be dogmatic and say, well, this is what I'm going to do, so therefore this is what you got to do. You still have to make your decision on how you want to do this for yourself. So, with all that said, you're going back to what is your why. In semen retention, you naturally have the drive, you have your energy, your vibration to attain success in all areas of life. And I believe that's 100% true. Your diet, your health, your career, your finances, you get to foster real connection with people, and ultimately you get to foster a real and spiritual connection with God, however you see God. So yeah, I think that about wraps this up. This is a cool little place. You know what? I've lived here in this area now more than 30 years. and I have never been to this spot. And I live 20 minutes away from here. This is Roaring River Falls on the Cumberland Rim in Middle Tennessee. And yeah, it's a beautiful area here. It's kind of down in this little gulch or chasm or gorge or whatever. And wow, look at this place. This is amazing. So nice. And it's got this cliff going up the back of it. And you know, over here is this little, there's an underground stream over here that comes out of the cliffside. It's got to be a in-fed spring. But yeah, this is absolutely gorgeous here. But yeah, I don't want to, in my videos, I don't want to run any more past than 30-35 minutes, because I think after time I start rambling and repeating myself. And I'm not about that. I don't want to do that. I want to remain true to what I'm doing here and not get too distracted. But I think this is a great backdrop anyway. It's a beautiful place on a beautiful spring day. With that said, peace y'all, and we'll talk later.